was late November in Colorado, and I was around 7 or 8 years old. My father had the idea of taking our family for a weekend getaway to a rented cabin to strengthen the bond between my sister, my father, my mother, and me. We decided to take a day off from school on Friday to get a head start. Arriving there, the cold was biting, but it made sense, considering it was almost December. We settled in, planned where to sleep, had dinner, and prepared for bed, excitedly discussing the activities for the next day. Since we arrived late, there wasn't much to do on the first day. However, that night, I heard strange noises outside resembling footsteps. Peeking out the window, I saw nothing and dismissed it as an animal. Attempting to return to sleep, about 15 minutes later, the sounds returned. Waking up my 11-year-old sister, we both investigated and spotted something outside, unsure of what it was, deciding it was best, for whatever it was, not to notice us. We went back to sleep. Sleep was elusive for me that night, and my sister experienced the same unease. Upon waking up, my mother was inside preparing breakfast, and my father was outside. I asked if I could join my dad, and my mom agreed, while my sister stayed inside. Outdoors, I found my father conversing with a short, chubby man with a shaved head, wearing a veteran cap. The man seemed nervous, sweating despite the freezing temperature. My father introduced me, and the man, Patrick, greeted me warmly, explaining he was a veteran who had gone through shell shock. Despite his cap indicating his veteran status, he appeared normal, and my father took a liking to him. Patrick shared that he had also rented a cabin nearby with his family. My father invited him in for breakfast, and everything seemed normal. After the meal, I went outside to play with my dad and Patrick. While playing, I fell and scraped my knee, and as fate would have it, my dad was inside at that moment. My mother called for him, and he hurried inside, leaving me outside with Patrick. Patrick suggested going to his cabin for band-aids, and perhaps naively I agreed. We chatted about my interests in video games. However, things took a strange turn when he asked about my shoe size and age. Not knowing my shoe size, I shared my age. He chuckled, making a comment about it being good to know. I realized his cabin was nowhere near ours, requiring a 20-minute walk at least. Feeling tired, I debated whether to continue my quest for the elusive band-aid. The night was taking a strange turn, but curiosity and exhaustion propelled me forward. We entered the cabin, and Patrick motioned for me to go in first. As I stepped inside, a chilling realization struck. There was no one else in the cabin, no family to be found. Concerned, I asked Patrick about his family's whereabouts, but he ignored my question and locked the door, adding an unsettling layer to the situation. Assuring me he'd fetch the band-aid, Patrick disappeared into the kitchen, magically producing one upon his return. He gestured for me to sit down, applying the band-aid while holding onto my leg. His remarks about my muscular build sent shivers down my spine. Unsettled, I stood up, claiming everything was fine. Though I insisted on returning to my worried parents, Patrick persuaded me to stay and eat, emphasizing it wouldn't take long. Feeling trapped, I reluctantly agreed, realizing the door was locked, and I wasn't confident about finding my way back to the cabin alone. Patrick's questions took a bizarre turn as he inquired about my weight, and his creepy smile intensified when I guessed around 70 pounds. When I asked to leave, he cryptically hinted that the evening was just beginning, and I shouldn't miss out on the fun. A sudden bang from the bedroom rattled us both. Patrick, appearing angered, retreated into the room, closing the door behind him. I heard him yell about someone not being allowed to move and having company. When he returned, he explained it was his sick wife, maintaining an unsettling smile. was a chaotic mess, clothes scattered everywhere, suggesting he might be living there. His wife emerged, expressing hunger, but Patrick's stern command sent her back into the room. Pale with red circles around her eyes, she looked like she had been crying. Inquiring about his kids yielded silence, Patrick skillfully diverting the conversation. Things took a sinister turn when he mentioned wanting me to try on kids' clothes. Unable to endure it any longer, I broke into tears. Patrick hugged me, insisting everything would be okay. Seizing the moment, I unlocked the door as he headed into the back room. I left quietly, not caring if I got lost. My priority was escaping the bizarre and unsettling situation with Patrick, questioning if that was even his real name. He lied about having kids, and who knows what else. Lost in the woods, I could still hear Patrick's angry shouts from his house. He was yelling at his supposed wife, using nasty names and expressing regret about letting me leave. I stopped in my tracks when I heard footsteps, quickly hiding behind a tree and peering in his direction. There he was, standing outside, seemingly searching for me. Although I was far enough away to barely see him, I could tell he was looking for me. He stepped into the forest shouting, "Hey kid, it's okay. You can come back now. You don't have to try on the clothes, and I have toys back in my cabin. All you have to do is come back." I started running, sprinting as fast as I could in a straight line, hoping to encounter someone from my family. I thought I heard shouting behind me, but I didn't stop to listen. After about an hour of running, I finally saw a cabin, my cabin. My father was outside searching for me. I ran up to him, crying, and told him about Patrick, emphasizing that he wasn't a good person and describing how he touched my legs. My father immediately called the person from whom we rented the cabin. He looked at me sternly, instructing me never to follow a stranger again. We left immediately that day and asked for a refund. The next day, the cabin rental owner apologized, and the man who owned the cabin rentals called the police. They went back to check the cabin, finding it empty. No sign of Patrick or his supposed wife. His clothes and belongings were still there, as they told us. However, nothing substantial happened afterward. The police asked questions and left without providing us any updates. Patrick's true identity remained a mystery. His name was likely false, and the claim of being a veteran may have been another deception. I couldn't help but wonder about him, his wife, and how he ended up living in that cabin. It seemed like he had been there for a while, and his sudden departure hinted that he might have anticipated the police coming after him for not renting the cabin. Numerous questions lingered, unanswered and unresolved. My buddy Lily owns a cabin by a lake in Washington. One summer, she invited me and her cousin Evan. It was an awesome few days, and on the last night, like the previous ones, we went fishing at the lake, just a short 5-minute walk from her cabin. To reach the beach, though, we had to pass through a small section of woods. During the day, it was a busy trail with women jogging and kids heading to another nearby beach. Our beach was more secluded, without a trail. The descent down the steep and slippery hill was a bit challenging, and on the way back, we had to climb on all fours to reach the top. We stayed at the beach until about 8, just sitting in the dark and relaxing. Being sensible kids, we mostly chatted while sitting on a log. Suddenly, we looked around and realized it had gotten dark. I suggested we head home, and Lily and Evan agreed. We packed up our gear. This was the latest we had stayed out at the beach, so my overactive imagination, fueled by scary movies, made me a bit scared. Silently, we walked up the hill. I mentioned to Lily and Evan that it was pretty creepy at night, and Evan, for some reason, decided to make it even scarier. He shared a story about mountain men from the 60s who lived in the woods. part of some cult. According to him, they had committed murders around the area, and some might still be around. Internally, I was terrified, but I outwardly told Evan to stop scaring us as we crossed the trail. Evan, however, looked to our right and suddenly stopped. He seemed scared. Lily told him to quit being silly, but he forcefully grabbed our arms and made us look where he was looking. At first, I couldn't see anything and just wanted to get home. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw a large man. We assumed it was a man due to the shape stumbling toward us slowly. Uncertain of his intentions, our kid instincts kicked in, and we scrambled up the hill as fast as possible. At one point, we turned around and saw the guy running, or stumbling quicker, towards us as we climbed. He got pretty close until we finally got over the hill and sprinted across the road to Lily's cabin. On the surface, it might sound innocent, but we all felt a deep sense of dread when we saw him on that trail. I didn't feel like he had good intentions. When we reached the cabin, we threw our gear on the porch and ran to the front door, which, of course, was locked. However, there was a secret knock her family had taught us to indicate a family member or friend. It was a fairly complicated rhythm, and both Lily and Evan banged on the door with the family knock. I remember looking around trying to see if the creep had followed us, but I saw nothing. We were let in, and in a panic, we told the adults the whole story. They dismissed it as probably just some guy we made feel bad, but we felt safe in the locked cabin with the grown-ups. The cabin had a walkout basement, not a creepy one, with a door and windows. Lily and I slept on bunk beds there. After about 5 minutes of calming down, we heard the family knock. At first, I thought it was Evan trying to come in from the stairway door, so I said, "Come in," but there was no response. It happened again, but this time we realized it was coming from outside the window. Lily and I turned completely white, staring at each other with that horrible feeling of terror in our stomachs. It happened again, a little more frantically. We ran to the stairway door and booked it up to the living room, where Lily's family and Evan were. We explained everything through panicked tears, and Evan went downstairs to listen. He confirmed it was definitely the knock. Lily's uncle, older brother, and older cousin gathered flashlights to go outside, and we heard it again, but on the front door this time. Everyone huddled together, and after a couple more knocks, Lily's uncle decided to call the police. Uncertain of the person's intentions, he told the police that someone was trying to get into the cabin. The knocking continued for another 2 minutes or so, and finally stopped. 5 minutes after the call, the police arrived with a comforting, loud pounding. They yelled through the door to Lily's uncle, who looked outside a window and saw other police searching for the creeper. The officer asked us 3 kids what happened in the woods, and we recounted the entire ordeal. They never found anyone, but those banging knocks on the door will stick with me forever. The officer suggested it was probably just some twisted person trying to scare kids, but what creeped me out the most was that the person had memorized the complicated family knock. All 3 of us slept on the floor together that night. In the summer of 2020, my friends Alex, Violet, and I decided to embark on a mountain vacation to cure our cabin fever. Desperate to escape, we chose a mountainous location, planning to camp and hike at various spots. For one night, we booked a cabin in the woods. A fire tower nearby was the only option available. Despite our initial excitement about having a night of freedom, we also entertained the idea of dropping acid at the cabin. Violet had brought along a whole sheet for the occasion. As we set off, a lingering discomfort gnawed at me, and I expressed my reservations about dropping acid that night. An argument ensued, but I held my ground, feeling strongly that tripping was not the right choice. After some heated exchanges, We continued our journey. The cabin was located about 30 minutes away from the nearest town, perched atop a mountain. The road leading to it was winding and rough, with no pull-offs or other campsites. As we approached the cabin, the unease persisted. Once we arrived, we settled in, started a fire, and listened to the night unfold. As darkness fell, we heard the distinct sound of an engine on the road, accompanied by the flash of headlights. A side-by-side, carrying 3 kids, pulled up. Our initial tension eased as they greeted us, smiled, waved, and headed up the fire tower before leaving. Although we had been warned about occasional visitors to the fire tower, they were the only ones who had come by. We extinguished the fire and moved inside to enjoy some lukewarm hot dogs. As we sat in silence, the eerie stillness of the remote location enveloped us. In the middle of nowhere, every sound became amplified, like the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind through branches. The absence of city noise made every noise jump-inducing, leaving us too frightened to speak. Eventually, I decided it was time to share my concerns. I cracked open a few wine coolers, passed them to Alex and Violet, and then slapped a board game down on the table between our bunk beds. It didn't take long for us to loosen up, and we were finally having the fun time we had envisioned, although we were more sober than we initially planned. We laughed, ignored the rumble of the woods, and later recalled hearing distant noises, the snap of a twig, or the faint rumble of an engine. None of us wanted to disrupt the casual atmosphere, so we brushed it off. However, our carefree evening took a terrifying turn when a human hand reached up to the window between us and slapped it 3 times. Instantly, we all screamed. Alex called the police, putting them on speakerphone and passing his cell to me. We armed ourselves with poker from the fireplace, and Violet began making frantic calls to family members, saying her last goodbyes. We held our breath, listening for any more noise, expecting whoever it was to make a silent retreat after hearing our police call. Dispatch arrived about 20 minutes later, combing the mountain with their dogs. They suggested it might have been a bear, but their doubtful expressions revealed their skepticism. Why would a bear smack the window instead of going for the hot dogs in the pan? And why make a stealthy retreat after our screams? They had no answers, only an unsettling anecdote. They found a car at the base of the mountain, the only sign of life. My blood ran cold, but Violet and Alex were too frazzled to fully grasp the weight of that statement. Dazed by this new horror, we discovered Violet's car, covered in handprints that didn't match ours. These prints touched places we hadn't. Terrified, we hastily gathered our belongings, eager to leave the wretched cabin behind. We followed the police, grateful for every pothole that distanced us from that unsettling mountain. I couldn't shake the thought of the car on the road. There was nothing else up there. No other campsites, just a narrow road to the top and the fire tower. The kids from earlier had driven up with their headlights on. Our mysterious visitor, however, had stopped further down the road and hiked the rest of the way, avoiding detection. They sought silence and secrecy, and I may never know their true intentions. I'm thankful for Alex's quick thinking in calling the police, wondering if our visitor knew we had service, a surprising blessing for us in the middle of nowhere.